You weren't bred and raised for happiness, and not for the love every song and every movie promised you. You were built as a tool. For 2,500 years, philosophers circled one idea, afraid to say it out loud. Family isn't there for you. One of them called your love a trick of nature, a nature that couldn't care less about you personally. All it wants is for you to reproduce. Another proved that your family churns out fresh workers for the economy free of charge, while you call it happiness. A third one demanded that children be taken away from their parents outright, because loving your own child is dangerous, to them and to everyone around them. And the most uncomfortable one of all asked you straight to your face, did you actually choose this life, or were you just scared of ending up alone? 15 philosophies, 15 different answers to a single question. Why does a human being need family? From Confucius to Sartre, from Rozanov's sacred sex to Marx's cold economic math. And at the end, we'll strip away all the pretty wrapping and boil it down to one answer, one that almost no one is going to like. Before we start, hit like and subscribe to the Maybe Meaning channel. Are you ready to be a good son, even if your parents never earned it? And if things with your family are strained to the breaking point, are you ready to give more than you get, simply because that's how it's supposed to be? Confucius would answer, yes, you should be ready. In the logic of Confucianism, family is the foundation everything else is built on. Can't be a good son, you'll never be a good citizen. The state is the same family, just scaled up by the thousands, and the ruler is the father of the nation. Obedience at home turns into obedience to the country. Asking a Confucian, why do I need family, is like asking, why do I need a spine? Now think about who benefits from a person raised in this logic. The state doesn't want free individuals. Free individuals are inconvenient. They ask questions, they argue, they demand explanations. The state wants people trained to obey hierarchy from childhood, ideally so early that it never even registers as training. Xiao, filial piety, isn't about loving your parents. It's a rehearsal of loyalty to whatever authority comes after them. First you learn not to talk back to your father, then not to your teacher, then your boss, then the state. Each rung is prepared by the one before it, and nowhere along the way will anyone ask whether you agreed to run in this relay of obedience at all. And here's the cold beauty of the system. It doesn't need to spend resources suppressing rebellion. Why build prisons and armies of overseers when you can raise people from childhood who don't want to rebel, who will punish themselves with guilt before anyone on the outside gets the chance? The perfect control is the kind that looks like virtue. Confucianism found a way to make obedience indistinguishable from love. From a biological standpoint, the Confucian approach works almost flawlessly. Hierarchy, care for elders, the passing of resources within the clan, all of it raised a group's odds of survival for tens of thousands of years. Tens of thousands of years ago, men went out to hunt, to war, to the fields, to where death was close. Women gathered the harvest, no time to spare for an infant. Who stayed with the children? Those no longer fit to hunt, but perfectly fit to pass on experience. This isn't sentimentality. It's the division of labor inside the clan. Experience wasn't lost. It went straight across, from those who had survived famine and attack, to those who hadn't survived it yet. A tribe that listened to its elders repeated fatal mistakes less often. A tribe that ignored them learned all over again, on its own corpses. The Confucian approach leaves no room for you as a person apart from your role. Your happiness is secondary. Your desires are secondary. Exhaustion, burnout, loneliness inside your own family, none of it enters the equation, because the equation wasn't written about you, it was written about order. You can be miserable for years beside a person you're obligated to honor purely because of their age. You can get no warmth from the older generation, no support, not even basic respect, and still be obligated to give care in one direction, with no right to refuse, no right to boundaries, no right to say, I'm hurting, or I'm tired. You have no voice while you're the younger one. And when you finally grow old, and the voice supposedly appears, there's nothing left for you to do but demand the same obedience from those who come next. But What if a person wants more than to perform the function of a good son or daughter? What if he wants to be loved for himself, not for the role, not for the obedience, not for bringing the tea to his elders on time? Confucius turned family into a school of obedience. But in ancient Greece, a different logic was born. Family not as training in submission, but as the first mandatory step toward becoming a full citizen, one capable of taking part in running the polis himself. The difference is subtle but fundamental. Let's see what Aristotle proposed. Can you count as a full human being without a family? Aristotle would say confidently, no, you can't. It comes down to the very logic by which a person could become anyone in society at all. For Aristotle, the human being is a political animal by nature. He pictured a country as a ladder with concrete rungs. First, you're born into a family. Several families join into a larger unit, a clan or a village. Because on its own, a single family can't provide itself with everything it needs. Not defense, not craft, not trade. And only when enough of these unions accumulate does the polis appear, the city-state. The one place where a person can fully realize himself as a citizen, take part in governance, speak at the assembly, have a voice. Without family, there's no healthy citizen. And without the citizen, there's no healthy society. Aristotle saw the value of family not in love, but in its function. Family is an instrument that produces citizens capable of living in society. How useful is this logic to the system in our time? The obvious answer? Let's look. If the state doesn't want to directly fund and oversee care for children, for the elderly, for the sick, then it needs structured units, not scattered lonely singles. Family is a free social service that works for the state while you think you're just loving your relatives. But the system is a symbiosis of the state and big business. And business has the exact opposite interest. A family of 5 buys 1 television, 1 refrigerator, 1 streaming subscription. They share resources. They cook soup in 1 pot for everyone. From a corporation's point of view, that's lost profit, and lost several times over. The ideal world for business looks different. Those same 5 people live in 5 different apartments, pay 5 mortgages, and order 5 separate food deliveries. Atomization multiplies the sales market, and the taxes collected along with it. So a split appears in which family turns out to be useful only to the spending side of the state, the side that saves on welfare. To the earning side, through consumption, the single person is far more profitable. Maybe sometimes family is needed precisely so you can be rid of it, for the sake of something greater than Aristotle's social ladders. Let's look at what was thought on this by the man who proposed the most radical solution in the history of philosophy. What if someone told you, your family is dangerous to the state, to the country, to the people? Are you ready to give up your own children for the common good? In his monumental work, The Republic, Plato proposed abolishing the traditional family outright for the ruling class and the warriors. Shared children, shared wives, no attachment to any particular relative. The logic is harsh. Personal attachment interferes with service to the common good. A ruler who loves his son more than the state will sooner or later put his son's interests above the people's. Is this useful to the system? Plato doesn't hide it. Family is useful for the majority, because it keeps people in manageable, predictable units. But for those who govern the processes, family is dangerous, because it creates an alternative loyalty, and because it's a weak spot you can press on to get what you want out of an official. That's why the elite has always kept careful watch to make sure that, among those who make the decisions, personal attachments don't interfere with the interests of the system. Sounds familiar if you take a close look at any modern corporation or government apparatus. Biologically, Plato's idea contradicts almost everything evolution has laid down in us. Care for your own genetically close offspring is one of the strongest instincts we have. Plato is essentially proposing to switch off this program for the sake of an abstract idea of the common good. Plato demands that a person go against his own biology, and history shows that such experiments usually end in nothing good. Maybe then, it's worth looking for a philosophy that doesn't abolish attachment, but teaches you to manage it from within. Let's see what was proposed by those who lived alongside empire, slavery, and constant instability. Can you love your wife, your children, your home, and at the same time be ready to lose it all tomorrow without your own self falling apart? The Stoics believed this is exactly what maturity is. Epictetus and the other Stoics looked at family differently from most philosophers before them. For them, the main question wasn't whether family is needed or not, but who actually governs your inner state. The Stoics divided everything in the world into two categories: what's within your power and what isn't. The health of your loved ones, their lives, their decisions, the very chance to be near them. None of it is ever fully within your power. Epictetus told his students plainly, as you kiss your child goodnight, remind yourself that tomorrow he might die, not because you wish him harm, but because only this way will you keep your reason if it actually happens. What remains within your power is one thing: how you inwardly respond to what occurs. From this, the idea of inner freedom is born. The free man isn't the one who will never have his family, home, or money taken away, but the one whose peace of mind doesn't depend on whether they're taken or not. If your sense of self, your worth, your calm collapse along with the loss of a wife, children, or possessions, then you were never actually free. You were simply attached to things that never truly belonged to you. The Stoic doesn't renounce family in advance, and doesn't live as a cold hermit. He lives beside his loved ones, cares for them, may even love them deeply. But inside he constantly keeps a distance, rehearses the parting in advance, so that at the moment of real loss, he doesn't break along with the loss. Family here is good right up to the line where it stops being the single source of your meaning. The moment you stop feeling like a whole person without your family, the Stoic will say, you don't just love your family, you're dependent on it, and dependence and freedom never coexist in the same person. Think about how convenient such a person is for the system. The ideal soldier, the ideal official, the ideal worker is a person with no vulnerable spots. If you can't be broken by the threat of losing your family, you're harder to manipulate, but you're also easier to use in any circumstance. Send you to war, transfer you to another city, work you to the bone, since you're not attached, after all. Stoic detachment turns a person into the perfect expendable material for any state machine, because he himself trained himself never to lose anything too deeply. From nature's point of view, this is rather unnatural. Attachment to offspring and partner is one of the main evolutionary strategies for the survival of the species. Training yourself into indifference toward the loss of your family means deliberately suppressing millions of years of natural selection. Wise nature created these emotions, so is the Stoics' emotional anesthesia wiser than nature? Is there a tradition where attachment to family, if lived through properly, is considered a source of liberation? It's worth looking east, to where philosophy built life out of stages. Are you ready not just to come to terms with losing your family someday in the future, in theory, but to stand up on your own 2 feet, in your right mind, and walk away from it forever, voluntarily, with no tragedy and no regret? Hindus divide life into 4 stages: student, householder, hermit, seeker of liberation. Family is useful, but it isn't the final goal. Through it, a person fulfills dharma, his duty to the world. He bears and raises children, supports society, undergoes spiritual discipline. But ideally, over time, a person must learn to release his attachments, including the family ones. When the children had grown, started their own families, and the household passed into their hands, the man, and often his wife after him, would leave home literally, go off to live in the forest, in a hut on the outskirts, renounce property, status, their former name, and former role. The logic of Dharma is that attachment to family, to the role of father, mother, master of the house, over time turns into a chain that holds the soul to the earth and won't let it move further, toward liberation, toward moksha. While you fulfill your duty to your lineage, you accumulate good karma, but you also accumulate attachment, and attachment, by this logic, is the main source of suffering and the cause of new rebirths. The benefit to the system. Society gets decades of a stable, productive citizen who bears children, works, pays taxes, keeps order, and then, when the person's strength and resources begin to run dry, he voluntarily withdraws from his active social role. The system spends no resources on a person's happy old age. It has already taken the sweetest slice of his life and simply doesn't want to give anything back. Biologically, the staging is quite logical. Reproductive age coincides with the householder stage, and the later decline of hormonal and physical activity coincides with the hermit stage. Nature and philosophy are unexpectedly in sync here. Elephants do roughly the same thing, leaving the herd to die at the elephant's graveyard. But what if a person isn't ready to release his attachments precisely when the philosophy prescribes it? What if the need for family, or conversely the rejection of it, doesn't obey a schedule of 4 stages? There's no room for individuality here. Hinduism says, live the attachment fully, fulfill your duty, and then consciously release it, or the wheel of rebirths won't stop. Buddhism will go even further and ask, why go through attachment at all? If you can see the root of suffering in it right away, and not let yourself get stuck in it. Have you ever caught yourself thinking that the ones who hurt you most are exactly the ones you love most, and that the tighter you hold on to a person, the more terrifying it is to lose them? The Buddha noticed this so sharply that he literally walked out of his own family, leaving his wife and son. The Buddhist view is uncomfortable. Most human suffering arises from attachments, and family is one of the strongest attachments that exists. So, a paradox appears. Family brings enormous love, but at the same time, it creates an enormous potential for suffering. Fear of loss, jealousy, dependence, endless desires, all of it comes bundled with closeness. Leaving his family became the Buddha's first practical step toward testing on himself whether this chain could be broken at all. Interestingly, after his enlightenment he did return, met Yashodhara and Rahula, and both later became his disciples, meaning the break wasn't a final rejection of them as people, but precisely a rejection of attachment as such. At the same time, Buddhism doesn't forbid family to lay people. Family can develop compassion, generosity, patience, awareness. A philosophy of renouncing attachments sounds like a threat to any structure of control. A person who's afraid of losing nothing is harder to govern. On the other hand, societies where a significant part of the population goes into monasticism and spiritual practice reduce pressure on resources, lessen competition for land and power, and at the same time create a huge layer of people occupied not with politics, but with inner searching. Detachment from the worldly works for the stability of the system. A grown man in full strength stops being a threat once he takes up spiritual practice seriously. But getting him to pick up a weapon and defend property and people also becomes problematic. Biologically, the Buddhist path is almost a revolt against evolution. Nature programmed us to cling to offspring and partner at any cost. Consciously renouncing this program demands colossal discipline and runs against the survival instincts of the lineage. Besides, if you rid yourself of all attachments, doesn't a person lose the very depth of life along with the pain? And isn't there spiritual growth within suffering itself? Let's look at how this is seen by a tradition that built an entire theology around family. Are you capable of being with a person not because it feels good with them, but because love has turned into a decision you make over again every morning, sometimes with clenched teeth? The Christian tradition holds this is exactly what real love is. For Christianity, family is less biology than spiritual practice. To love your spouse and children means to learn patience, forgiveness, and sacrifice every single day. Love within family is valuable not because it's pleasant, but because it demands self-giving and the overcoming of your own ego. And yet a curious contradiction appears. Christianity simultaneously holds celibacy in high regard. Family is considered a good but not a necessary condition for salvation. Both celibacy and marriage carry a powerful charge for spiritual growth. An institution that teaches you to endure, forgive, and sacrifice yourself for others prepares a person perfectly for submission to the system, to the state, the army, the employer. A person used to enduring in marriage for the sake of a higher goal endures injustice at work more easily, and pressure from those in power, because he was long ago taught to see endurance as a virtue rather than a problem. In nature, Stable monogamous pairs with a division of roles and mutual obligations raise the survival rate of offspring. Parental sacrifice for children is one of the strongest evolutionary mechanisms there is. Christianity offers family as a school of sacrifice, where you constantly overcome yourself for the sake of something higher. It sounds lofty, but if every day in the family is spiritual growth through friction, can you actually lean on such a family? The Islamic tradition answers this question completely differently. Family here isn't a training ground for cultivating sacrifice, but a structure of mutual protection, where everyone should receive no less than they give. Let's see how it works. Imagine that every time you fall, someone is already there. Not because you got lucky, but because that's how the system is built. The Islamic tradition built family as exactly such a system, where no one is left one-on-one with misfortune, simply by default. Al-Ghazali and Ibn Khaldun regarded family as an institution of mutual responsibility. The benefit of family is many-sided: moral protection, economic support, the raising of children, the preservation of the community. Family here is the infrastructure for a person's survival among other people. A society organized around strong family and communal ties is far easier to govern through local leaders than through direct control over every single individual. Family and community take on the functions of social protection that would otherwise have to be provided by the state directly: care for the sick, the poor, the elderly. The stronger the grassroots structures of mutual aid, families, the lighter the load and the higher the resilience of the system as a whole, especially in a crisis. Biologically, mutual support within the extended family and community is one of the most proven strategies for the survival of the species. Cooperation among relatives raises the odds of offspring surviving more than the isolation of any single individual, however strong he may be. But a system of mutual responsibility easily turns into a system of mutual control, where a person's individual choice is subordinated to the expectations of the lineage and the community. Protection turns into dependence and support into pressure. Leaving such a system unilaterally is almost impossible without losing everything: status, support, sometimes family itself. Is there a philosophical system that lets you enjoy the advantages of support, yet leaves a person the right to leave the family without sin when it stops being worthwhile? It's precisely with this idea that the Age of Enlightenment began, whose fruits we're enjoying right now. Have you ever quit a job? Remember that feeling? I signed the contract, I fulfilled the terms, but at some point, I realized this place was no longer for me, and I simply left. Locke and Rousseau were the first who dared to look at marriage the exact same way, as a contract between two adults that exists precisely as long as it suits them both. John Locke argued that family arises from the voluntary union of people. Its use is the protection of children's rights, the transfer of property, the raising of free citizens. Family stops being a sacred, unchanging structure and becomes a form of agreement. Jean-Jacques Rousseau shifts the emphasis to the child. He was the first to say that childhood isn't merely a period of preparation for adult life, but a value in its own right, one the family is obligated to protect. A child is formed not through harsh discipline and duty, but through emotional closeness, through the feeling of being loved and protected. Family becomes the place where a person first learns what trust is, what attachment is, what safety is, and it's precisely this first experience that determines who he grows up to be. For the first time in thousands of years of philosophy, family came to exist for the sake of the people in it, not for the state, not for God, and not for the lineage. Where's the benefit for the system here? At first glance, it seems the contractual model of family weakens the state's control, since people decide for themselves whether to enter a union or not. But in practice, the opposite happens. The state gains the right to regulate this contract, to legalize it, to intervene in matters of inheritance and custody, to tax it. Family turns from a sacred institution, untouchable by power, into a legal construct the system can tune to itself through laws on marriage, divorce, parental rights, fees, and fines. Biologically, the idea of contractual family isn't as revolutionary as it seems. Nature invented it long before Locke. Most birds are monogamous, but only for a single season. They nested, raised the chicks, scattered. The next year, each looks for a new partner. No loyalty for loyalty's sake, only the result. Albatrosses, usually held up as a symbol of eternal love, split up in roughly 20% of cases, and almost always after an unsuccessful brood. Didn't work out together, we try with another. An alpha male wolf who's lost his strength or status often loses his high-ranking partner too. No sentimentality, pure pragmatism. Nature, it seems, always knew what Locke put into words. Locke and Rousseau gave people a beautiful idea. You're free, you choose, you enter the contract consciously. But then Schopenhauer appears and asks, are you even sure it's your choice? Where does the very desire to start a family, find a partner, have children come from? You think you made a considered decision. Maybe you simply ran the program nature wrote for you long before you were born, and there was no free will here from the very start. Sure you met the love of your life? No. You just became the victim of one of the most elegant deceptions nature ever devised, and you didn't even notice the hook. Schopenhauer was deeply pessimistic and biologically dead-on accurate. He believed love and the desire to start a family are nature's mechanism for reproduction, and nothing more. A person thinks, I've met the love of my life. Nature at that moment thinks, excellent, we continue the species. Genes are a match, hips are wide, the offspring will come out sturdy. An instinct is at work, one that's millions of years older than you, and it uses you as a disposable carrier for passing genes onward. Did your job? Pass them on, you're free to go. Nature doesn't need your happiness. It needs your child. And being in love is just a chemical trap to keep you from running off before you've done your job. Being in love for long isn't profitable either. Being in love is expensive and dangerous. A genuine intoxication. And in that state, you're simply unfit for survival. All-consuming passion switches off after 2 or 3 years, right around when the child has already been born and grown a little. And then you spend the rest of your life wondering where the feelings went and why a stranger suddenly ended up beside you. The system skillfully channels this already existing biological instinct into the direction it wants. Advertising, cinema, consumer culture have exploited exactly this blind spot for years, selling you the dream of love in order to sell you a house, a ring, a wedding, a 30-year mortgage. That's how it transforms the ideas of family life standards into a stable workforce paying off the long-term loan it took on. But if it all comes down to biochemistry, does that devalue the real experience of a person living through genuine closeness and care? Maybe the point isn't that love is an illusion, but that illusion and reality are woven together here so tightly that they simply can't be pulled apart. Schopenhauer looked at the biological program as a verdict, but there was also a philosopher who didn't think you were obligated to submit to it unconsciously, like an animal. The strong man differs from the weak not in being free from nature, but in being aware of its pressure and deciding for himself whether to use that pressure or resist it. In the hands of the strong, family is a chance to create something greater than himself. Are you even worthy of having children? Friedrich Nietzsche asked this question without any delicacy, and a yes wasn't for everyone. For Nietzsche, family is justified only when it helps produce stronger, more developed people. The strong man, as he understood him, is the one who can endure uncertainty, who doesn't hide behind comfort and habit, who takes on responsibility not because it's expected, but because he decided so himself. He passes on to his children, not fears and complexes, but the ability to think for themselves, and doesn't need the crowd's approval. Upbringing in the family, for Nietzsche, isn't about tradition in the sense of do as grandfather did. It's about which values you pass on, which way of looking at the world, what bar you set for yourself. A family that passes on to its children only the fear of poverty and the wish to be like everyone else is, for Nietzsche, worse than no family at all. Family is an educational institution. Nietzsche noticed that most people start a family precisely because they can't be alone with themselves. Family becomes a way to drown out the inner emptiness, to fill the time, to get social approval. Family easily turns into a trap of mediocrity, a way to hide from real life behind comfort and habit. Such families, in his words, don't produce strong people. They produce ones just as frightened as the parents themselves. only in the next generation. States began mastering Nietzsche's ideas about worthy offspring before the ink on his manuscripts had dried. Nazi Germany took his philosophy, tore it out of context, and turned it into an ideological weapon. Programs of forced sterilization of the unworthy, encouragement of childbearing among the right families. The system took Nietzsche's idea of quality and made it an instrument of mass control over a person's most intimate decision: who to reproduce with, and whether you have the right to at all. In our time, business has learned to sell the feeling of exceptionality to the whole crowd at once. The cult of the strong personality, who overcomes himself and needs no crutches of tradition, sells perfectly. Self-development books, coaching, a person convinced of his own exceptionality pays for it willingly and dearly. And you, dear viewer, do you consider yourself exceptional? Watching clever, educational videos? Biologically, a harsh selection of the strongest partners and an emphasis on quality rather than quantity of offspring does occur in nature. It's part of sexual selection, though nature doesn't do it as consciously and ideologically as Nietzsche proposes. But on the whole, the ideas don't contradict human nature. They simply place nature a little below the self-awareness of one's own vector of development. Nietzsche asks, what did family give you? For Nietzsche, family is a means, and the measure is the personality that came out of it. There's another philosopher who looks at the entrance, at the process itself, and says that the main skill absorbed in the family is that family teaches a person to give, to act for another's sake without counting who owes whom how much. This skill certainly complements the strong personality. Let's see how it works. Look at how you behave with people outside your home. Can you trust without guarantees? Can you give without counting on getting something back? Are you even capable of being part of something bigger than yourself? Hegel argued, all of this you either absorbed in your family in childhood, or you absorbed it nowhere. How do you behave inside your family? You don't count how many times you helped your child and how many times he helped you back. You don't hand your wife a bill for making dinner. You just do it because they're yours. Hegel called this the first form of human freedom, to learn to act for another's sake without calculation, to dissolve into we and not lose yourself. Then you come to work, and there everything is arranged the exact opposite way, every man for himself. You sell your time, your colleague sells his. No one owes anyone anything just because your workstations happen to be close. This isn't cynicism, it's the market, and it works precisely through the self-interest of each participant. Hegel didn't condemn this, he simply noted it. The market and the family live by opposite rules, and a person needs to be able to operate in both modes. If something went wrong in the family, if instead of unconditional acceptance, there was calculation, control, or coldness, a person walks out into the world with a broken first mode. He carries market logic into places it shouldn't reach, into friendship, into love, into his own family. He counts, controls, distrusts, and sincerely doesn't understand why the people close to him grow tired of him. If a person absorbed the lessons of unconditional love in the family, the benefit to the system is obvious. The state doesn't need to teach you from scratch to sacrifice yourself for the common cause. That work is already done, for free and unnoticed. You got used to dissolving into we long before ideology, advertising, or politics ever touched you. And once you start seeing a big family where it would be more fitting to see your own interest, this becomes a point of manipulation for corporations and the state. Look, our interests are being trampled on the other side of the globe. Look, our company's revenue isn't growing as fast as it should. Look how another nation has more children than we do. Buy your country's products, love and unity. Yes, yes. Biologically, Hegel's idea sounds very convincing. Early attachment to family forms in a person the very capacity for social cooperation, without which the survival of neither the species nor a single group is possible. Without the first experience of dissolving into we, a person probably would never have learned to trust anyone beyond himself. If family, Hegel, is only a preparatory stage before the big life, then it turns into a mere function whose task is to teach you unconditional acceptance. Is there a tradition for which family is the final point? Not an intermediate one, and not a spiritual or social one, but a bodily one, almost religious in its very physiological essence. Remember how you were taught to relate to sex? Most likely, there was always a feeling somewhere in the background that it's something shameful, dirty, not spoken of out loud, something to hide. The Russian philosopher Vasily Rozanov said the exact opposite. The very thing you were taught to be ashamed of is the most sacred thing there is in a human being. For centuries, Christianity placed the spiritual above the bodily, fasting above food, prayer above intimacy, the monk above the family man. Rozanov turned this ladder upside down. For him, sex, conception, the birth of a child, family itself, none of it is base physiology that has to be justified by love or marriage. It's a holy thing in its own right. His logic is simple. In the moment of conception and birth, a person does literally the same thing God does. Creates new life out of nothing. No prayer, no fast, no spiritual feat brings you as close to eternity as the birth of a child does, because here you don't reason about immortality, you actually accomplish it, continuing yourself in another human being. Hence the conclusion that shocked his contemporaries. The health of an entire people depends not on how many saints and ascetics it has, but on how honestly and fully people live out love, intimacy, and family, without shame and without guilt. What's the benefit for the system in such a philosophy? At first glance, it seems that lifting the shame from intimate life weakens the levers of control, since it was precisely through shame and guilt that religious and state institutions governed people's behavior for centuries. But, in reality, when the state needs to raise the birth rate, it doesn't tell people, have children, we need new taxpayers and soldiers. That sounds cynical and doesn't work. Instead, the language of holiness kicks in. Motherhood is a sacred calling. Family is a spiritual pillar. The birth of a child is the highest meaning of a woman's life. Medals for mothers of many children. To give birth is a duty to the motherland. Church and state hand in hand. A person who came to believe that childbearing is sacred will do for free and with pride what no order could compel. Big business has mastered the same territory, only it sells not the motherland, but the picture. The wedding industry turns a sacred union into a bill for hundreds of thousands. Entire markets are built on the sacralization of parenthood. Surely you wouldn't begrudge money for the most precious thing, your own child. On the feeling that birth and family are holy, you can sell anything at any price. Since haggling with a holy thing is shameful, Rozanov sincerely freed a person from shame. The system quickly realized that a person freed from shame is easier both to mobilize and to fleece. Biologically, Rozanov's view coincides almost literally with what evolution says. Reproduction and care for offspring really do lie at the very center of the biological meaning of the species' existence. Rozanov clothed this in a religious philosophical form, removing the usual sense of guilt, but in deifying sex and family, it's easy to slide into the opposite extreme, to declare childlessness, celibacy, or alternative forms of life inferior, insufficiently sacred. Why consecrate one particular path while removing the others from social life? If you look at all forms of a person's existence within society coldly, without religion, and without any romance at all, simply as an economic mechanism, here a philosophy awaits us that renounced all metaphysics for the sake of pure calculation. Ready to learn that your marriage exists not for the sake of love, but because someone, after all, has to be handed the property accumulated over a lifetime, and the next generation of labor power has to be reproduced. Marx and Engels would answer, that's exactly how it is. Karl Marx, and especially Friedrich Engels, regarded family as part of the larger economy. Engels' main thought goes like this. Family, in its familiar form, was born not out of love, but out of private property. As long as people had nothing, there was no rigid family either. People lived in communities. Children belonged to the whole clan. No one counted mine and yours. But as soon as a man acquired property, livestock, land, tools, a new question arose. Who to leave it all to after death? And to answer it, a guarantee was needed that the heir was definitely your own son, not someone else's. This is where, according to Engels, the monogamous family is born, not for feelings but for property. The woman is locked into fidelity because her body becomes the instrument guaranteeing the purity of inheritance. Engels called it plainly, The first-class oppression in history coincided with the oppression of woman by man. The romantic institution presented to us as the crown of love was, in his eyes, simply a mechanism for transferring capital, disguised as feelings. And then this machine acquires a second function. Family not only passes property down through inheritance, it also produces new workers for the system. It bears, feeds, raises, and delivers to the factory the next generation of working hands. Capital doesn't need to spend a single coin to grow itself a new labor force. Family does it all for capital, sincerely believing it's raising children for their own happiness. Accumulating resources within the family really does raise the odds of offspring surviving more than squandering resources alone. Family is essentially a multiplier. It accumulates capital, real estate, connections, whereas the single person eats through and burns off resources on an imitation of a full life. The Marxist view explains why family is needed by the economy, but says almost nothing about why it's needed by a specific person, who's reduced to the function of labor power. What if we remove economics, the state, morality, and religion from the equation entirely, and ask whether a person needs family simply because he himself decided so, with no external justification at all? Imagine you've lived to the end of your life, looked back, and realized you started a family simply because that's what everyone does. Your parents were waiting for grandchildren. Your friends had already married off. It was frightening to be left alone. There'd be no one to bring you a glass of water in old age. And not once in your whole life did you stop and ask yourself honestly, did I even want this? Or did I just drift with the current wherever it carried me? Sartre and Camus believed this is the worst thing that can happen to a person. The existentialists took away people's last support. There's no objective reason to start a family, but there's no objective reason not to start one either. Neither God, nor nature, nor society can decide for you whether it's right or not, because a universal right answer doesn't exist. There's only your choice, and the entire weight of that choice rests on you alone. A reasonable person, according to existentialism, might choose family because he consciously wants to take on responsibility for another. He understands that raising a child is creating a whole world out of nothing, investing your values, your outlook into another human being, and watching someone independent emerge from it. Or he might choose family as a project that takes him beyond his own ego, forces him to think not only of himself, gives him the chance to love a specific person every day, with all their flaws, and to find in that daily choice a meaning you can't get anywhere else. For such a person, family isn't a flight from freedom, but its fullest realization. I could have not bound myself, but I chose to bind myself, and I answer for it. That same reasonable person can, by this philosophy, consciously choose the opposite. He might realize that his calling, his life's work, his creativity, or his freedom of movement are incompatible with responsibility for a family, and honestly admit it instead of having children and then blaming them for the fact that he never came into his own. He might see that he isn't ready to give another person what they need and refuse family precisely out of responsibility, not out of selfishness. He might choose solitude as a space in which he's more honest with himself and more useful to the world. And this, per Sartre, is just as full and worthy a choice as starting a family. The difference isn't in what you chose. The difference is in whether you chose at all. The paradox is that this philosophy is at once the most dangerous and the most convenient for the system. For thousands of years, people were governed through "it's expected," "it's God's will," "it's what nature commands," "it's how the forefathers did it." Existentialism declares all these formulas a bluff. No one has the right to tell you how to live. A person who's truly absorbed this stops fearing the state, the church, and public opinion, because he understands, behind all their orders, stands no higher authority, only people who want to control. But there are upsides for the system too. A society where everyone invents his own meaning is a society where no one is connected to anyone. Each is locked inside his own individual choice, as if in a separate studio apartment. 1,000,000 free loners resist power worse than one village united by even a primitive but shared idea. It's enough to give a person just enough freedom to leave him completely alone. Existentialist freedom of choice almost contradicts nature. Evolution never assumed that a single individual would rationally weigh whether to reproduce at all. Instinct works automatically, without reflection. Existentialism demands that a person make a conscious choice precisely where nature was counting on mindless automatism. Well, it's time to bring all 15 philosophies together and see what remains when you look at the bare facts. You've just gone through 15 completely different philosophies, and not one of them gave you a single simple answer. Something felt close, something triggered rejection. Write in the comments about what set you off. Let's discuss. Family teaches you to keep order and obey, makes you a full member of society, shows how dangerous attachment is for someone who serves something greater, trains your inner freedom, and teaches you not to break at loss, gives you a mandatory life experience you'll one day be able to outgrow and release, carries within it the pain of attachment, turns you into a human being through daily sacrifice, gives you support and insurance against the blows of life, becomes a conscious union of free people instead of a cage, is an ancient mechanism for continuing the species, creates someone stronger than a loner, lets you pass on the best that's in you, returns holiness to the body and to birth, and lifts a centuries-old shame, gives you the chance to pass on accumulated material goods, becomes your own free choice, for which only you are answerable. And now look at them all at once, and notice what jumps out only when they stand side by side. Notice that you're almost absent from this whole story. You keep turning out to be not the client, but the contractor. Family wasn't invented so you'd feel good. Your feeling good is, at best, a side effect, a pleasant reward for running someone else's program. You were raised for something else. Biology is simpler and more honest than any philosophy. We're biochemical creatures. Our brains are programmed to get the highest pleasure from two things: protecting our lineage and raising our offspring. No likes on social media, no purchases, and no career growth will give you the oxytocin surge and the sense of rightness of being that comes from the moment you return to a home where you're awaited. The statistics quietly confirm the same thing. Married people on average earn more steadily and live longer, not because they got lucky, but because they have a social mandate inside their own home. The loner eats through resources on an imitation of life. The family accumulates them, so why do you really need family? Not for the pretty picture from the ads, not for the romantic myth that movies and songs sell you. Family is needed for the same reason it was needed by your ancestors 30,000 years ago. To survive, to pass on not just genes but values, the way you laugh, the very family name. This is the only form of immortality confirmed not by faith, but by science. Love, if it exists in any pure form at all, turns out to be not the cause, but the consequence. A thin emotional layer over a far older, far mightier mechanism of survival. And even if family so often turns out to be an object of manipulation for the system, starting a family, having children, is the only way to tell the system, I am stronger, I will survive, and I will go on living in my children. Now, if, knowing all this, you still want it, then it's finally your choice, and not someone else's program. I think there's something here worth thinking about.